So, thank you for having me here. I want to start by saying I'm not a professional in Hegel studies. In fact, I just started university a week ago to study Western philosophy. My main work is as a yoga teacher. I'm same time both practitioner and study also philosophy of yoga and translating ancient yoga texts. That said, I've been reading Hegel and Western philosophy for years, and I'm here today to share my humble thoughts on Hegel. My topic today is Hegel's views on ethical life and the idea of good, as explored in his critical essay on the episode of Mahabharata, known by name Bhagavad Gita by Wilhelm von Humboldt. To begin with, it is worth to noting that during Hegel's time there was significant interest in Indian culture. This was in part due to renewed curiosity following a decline in interest in Christianity after Middle Ages. Additionally, scholars had discovered that the ancient Indian language Sanskrit was related to Greek and Latin, which piqued intellectual curiosity. This period can be called the Indian Renaissance, as many intellectuals, linguists, philosophers, and poets were fascinated by what they called Eastern wisdom. While some were deeply captivated by Indian culture, others approached it very arrogant. However, Hegel maintained, I think, more moderate and balanced attitude toward Eastern culture, contrary to claims that he was Eurocentric. In the later years of his life, Hegel developed a growing interest in Indian philosophy and spoke about it more extensively. In this essay on Bhagavad Gita, Hegel explores its ethical, moral, religious, and philosophical dimensions, often comparing them to his own philosophical ideas. At the time, the Gita was presented to him as a key text for understanding Hindu thought, which remains true today. Hegel first focuses on the fact that the Gita is a dialogue between Lord Krishna and his friend Arjuna, set on the battlefield just before war begins. The text can be viewed as a series of several lectures, maybe 17 or 18 lectures, in which Krishna encouraged his hesitant and morally conflicted Arjuna to fight. They also discuss more mundane topics, such as diet, including what kind of food one should eat and what to avoid. For Hegel, this is a strange situation for exploring philosophical doctrine. Hegel comments on this by saying, this strange form of the introduction makes us prepared for the fact that also with regard to the essence, the religion and morality, we are to expect something completely other than our familiar ideas. End quote. But very soon Hegel finds a familiar idea of the good. He says, here is a principle we have to necessity to give up all claims to the fruits of actions, to all results. Never, says Krishna, is an action's value estimated by its fruits. This tranquility marks without doubt philosophically a mental constitution coming close to the sublime. We can recognize in this the moral obligation to do good for the sake of the good only, the duty only to duty's sake. End quote. I think he implicitly interprets the Gita's idea of karma yoga, which means the yoga of action, as coming close to Kant's theory of moral. This is a very interesting point, even today. As we know in yoga philosophy, karma yoga means the surrender of all actions to great master or renunciation of all fruits of action. In yoga theory, karma yoga is a way of self-control, meaning not identifying our true selves with our actions or with our body and mind. But Hegel's interpretation, I think, does not contradict the classical understanding of karma yoga, but it's slightly different. But this interpretation still remains open for me. The existence of this moral formulation is interesting for Hegel. And this doctrine existed centuries before Immanuel Kant developed his moral ideas. Since we do not know the exact time when the Mahabharata was written, it is possible that Gita was written even before Christ. I think for Hegel this discovery was very important. As a philosopher who was deeply historical in his thinking, he aimed to explain this development of ideas over time and across cultures. If he recognized this idea of the good as the highest moral concept, one superior to utilitarian ethics, he may have felt that he had overlooked some important ideas from the history of philosophy. This could explain his increasing interest in Indian philosophy, particularly in practical philosophy. Later in his analysis, Hegel seems to try to distance himself from this discovery, saying that while it is formally correct, we now need to examine its content. He tries to understand what good means for Arjuna, and in this specific situation, or we could say how Hindus interpret the idea of good. Hegel says, apart from this great moral intention, there arises for the interest of second necessity, namely to know what aim action is to strive after, what duties it must fulfill or must respect in the case of interest being determined by arbitrariness or circumstances. End quote. This is quite reasonable, as Hegel teaches in Science of Logic that neither form nor content alone is sufficient. Both must be in harmony with one another. Form and content should be adequate to each other. Hegel is saying that the Indian principle, like modern morals, does not automatically lead to specific moral duties. To understand these duties, one must first examine the underlying motivation of text Bhagavad Gita, and then consider how duty and action relates to its teaching on yoga in general. This is crucial for understanding Hegel's, I think, for understanding Hegel's ideas on ethics and morality. For Hegel, it is essential to see the bigger picture. Everything must be viewed in context, where even the smallest detail can influence the entire whole. This is how we must approach the content of the good. For Hegel, Arjuna's war against his relatives is taken as just. Thought the Bhagavad Gita does not dwell on the rightness of the war itself. Arjuna's thought arises not from the war, but from the fact that he must fight his own kinsmen. As it seems to do at first, must be dependent on the nature of what value which in the Indian Arjuna's mentality is attached to family ties. Next, Hegel compares the Indian understanding of morality with European perspective. I think, and this is the most interesting part, to the moral understanding of the European, the sense of this tie is a moral in itself. Have the love as their foundation and as self-sufficient starting point. We see, however, that it is not this moral sentiment which in the hero causes a reluctance to lead his relatives to the slaughter. We would commit crimes, he says, if we would kill those robbers. Not in the sense that killing them as relatives would be in itself the crime, but the crime would be a consequences, namely that through extinction of generation, the duty bond and the religion performances of the family would be destroyed, and that way the noble woman will be defiled, from which results the mixture of castes. End quote. So, according to Hegel, Arjuna's motive stems from a lack of genuine love for his kinsmen. The ethical sense alone is not enough for Arjuna to see the slaughter as inherently evil. Instead, he is primarily concerned with the social consequences which are tied to the caste system, a system considered sacred in Hindu thought. Hegel views the caste system as a lower form of freedom, where all duties are predetermined by birth, meaning they are dictated by nature. For Hegel, a cultured person should transcend this mindset. To show more explicitly what for Hegel means freedom from European perspective, let's see in the philosophy of mind what Hegel says. This subjective or moral freedom is what a European especially calls freedom. In virtue of the right there, a man must possess a personal knowledge of the distinction between good and evil in general. Ethical and religious principles shall not merely lay their claim on him as external laws and precepts of authority to be obeyed, but have their essence, recognition, or even justification in his heart, sentiment, conscience, intelligence, etc. The subjectivity of the will in itself is its supreme aim and absolutely essential to it. End quote. From this, we see that Arjuna's motive in Hegel's understanding is external to him. His duty and responsibility come from his belonging to the specific castes, kshatriya or warrior castes. This is true in general sense from perspective of Hindu caste system. For Hegel, karma yoga is formally about doing good for its own sake, but in this case, the content contradicts the idea. Doing good is seen as being more focused on the results of actions, creating contradiction. However, if we read Gita closely, the issue is not only the consequences of killing relatives, but the act of killing itself is seen as tragedy, where here we can quote some part from Gita. In Gita, there Arjuna says, "O Krishna, I see no use of killing my kinsmen in battle. I desire neither victory, nor pleasure, nor kingdom. What is the use of kingdom, of enjoyment, or even life? Because all those for whom we desire kingdom, enjoyments, and pleasures are standing here for the battle, giving up their lives. I do not wish to kill my teachers and other relatives who are about to kill us, even for the sovereignty of the three worlds, let alone for the earthly kingdom. It would be better indeed to live on alms in this world than to slay these noble personalities, because by killing them I would enjoy wealth and pleasures stained with their blood." End quote. Here it is difficult to assess that Arjuna's only motive is external, solely worrying about breaking religious and caste laws. He also harbors personal sentiments, which we can refer to as a subjective attitude toward his kinsmen, regardless of whether they are on the right side or deserve to die. Perhaps Hegel demands much higher standards of ethics and morality here. Akin to Kantian perspective, considers the situation in the Gita when Lord Krishna asks Arjuna to kill his relatives on the battlefield. This can compare to the story of Abraham from Bible. There is some similarities between these two situations. Who was commanded by God to sacrifice his son Isaac. Kant argued that if Abraham had been truly moral, he would have doubted whether the voice commanded him to kill his son was really divine. For Kant, any moral law that contradicts rational principles, such as the preservation of human life, cannot be divine. This standard of ethics places rational morality above even divine commandments. I think Hegel's interpretation of the Gita questions the simple acceptance of Krishna's command to Arjuna. He suggests he should evaluate whether such actions align with higher ethics, encouraging critical thinking about morality even when actions seem divinely sanctioned. In conclusion, we can see that the Hegel's concept of ethics is very complex and varied and shaped by context. It brings together the ideas of subjective and objective spirit. While it appears differently across cultures, there is a shared notion or some similarities, even if it can be hard to recognize. Reflecting on this analysis from 10 years ago, I recognized the inherent danger in misinterpreting this on any sacred text or sanctions. Many atrocities throughout history have been committed in the name of noble ideas. The Bhagavad Gita, for instance, was also misused in 20th century to justify violence. Such distortions arise when texts are taken out of context, focusing solely on form while neglecting the deeper moral content. I think a careful contextual approach, as Hegel's analysis demonstrates, can prevent these kinds of tragic misunderstandings. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Thank you.